Good day, World History 2 students. It's Mr. Deegan in the D226 studios. It's time for the last unit of the 2017-2018 school year. Here we go. Learning target, please write this down. I will understand how the Cold War started. And the beginning of the Cold War has to do with these two countries. What was the Cold War? It was a political rivalry between the US and its democratic allies and the Soviet Union and its communist allies. US, Soviet Union. When was the Cold War? The year it started, 1945. Year it ended, 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union. What was the Cold War about? Two major things. Number one, nuclear weapons. It was an arms race, a race to see who could be the most powerful with their weapons. The US first used the atomic bomb in 1945. Remember Japan and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then the USSR tested its first atomic bomb in 1949, becoming the second country in the world to have a nuclear weapon. Uh-oh. Two competitors, both with nukes? What was the Cold War about? Number two, it was also about democracy versus communism. Different ideas about how to govern and how to rule people. The United States had capitalism, an economy based on free enterprise and competition. Businesses compete to see who gets the best profits. Democracy, where citizens vote to elect their leader. And then in the Soviet Union, it was ruled by communism, an economy controlled by the government. The government has control over most things. And a dictatorship was attached to this, where citizens have no power, no vote, no decision-making. How did the Cold War start? A promise not kept. I'll explain. First, there was an important meeting that started the Cold War. It was called the Yalta Conference. When was it? February 1945. At the Yalta Conference, leaders met in Yalta, Ukraine, which is a country in Eastern Europe that is neighbors with the Soviet Union. So on your map right now, please circle the Ukraine so that you know where it's located. At the Yalta Conference in the Ukraine, these were the big three leaders who discussed. This is Winston Churchill. He's from Britain. Please write his name down, and there's what he looks like. This is Franklin Roosevelt of the United States, and he is only alive for 3 more months after this picture is taken. And this is Joseph Stalin. He is the leader of the Soviet Union in 1945. These 3 men discussed things at the Yalta Conference. What happened? What did they discuss? Britain, the US, and the Soviet Union agreed to pressure Germany to surrender in World War II. And Stalin agreed to allow free elections in Eastern Europe. However, Stalin lied. He did not allow free elections in Eastern Europe. In fact, he tried to control Eastern European neighbors as much as possible. This man is a liar. When did FDR die? April 12th, 1945. And there's a newspaper headline from the Los Angeles Times. Roosevelt dead, cerebral hemorrhage, so he had a blockage in his brain. And President Truman then takes over as president. What was the Truman Doctrine? Truman had a doctrine, which means set of beliefs. And what was this? It was President Truman's foreign policy that wanted to contain, meaning to limit, the Soviet Union, and the expansion of communism. Truman wanted to stop this octopus that was communism from strangling the world with its many tentacles. The Truman Doctrine, Truman's foreign policy, was nicknamed the policy of containment. And here you see a container that is trying to hold in communism from spreading. Because if you open that lid, the smell of communism comes out and goes all over the place. We don't want that. We want it contained. How did the USSR expand during this time? The Soviet Union bullied its neighbors. It put military pressure on them. And these neighbors had their own governments, but the Soviet Union influenced their decisions. And these neighbors that were controlled were called satellite nations. How did the USSR expand? Well, it used these countries. And I'm going to please label on your map these countries. They're all satellite nations that were controlled by the Soviet Union in the beginning of the Cold War. How was the world divided during the Cold War? Well, there was language that was used. This man, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, called the divide between the US and its allies in Western Europe and the Soviet Union and its allies in Eastern Europe the Iron Curtain. So please label your map. This should say Western Europe, blue, the allies of the US, and this should say Eastern Europe, the allies of the Soviet Union. The Iron Curtain, what was it? It wasn't real. It was an invisible line separating the East and the West. And this is a political cartoon showing Winston Churchill trying to peek under the Iron Curtain to see what the Soviet Union's doing on the other side. Joe Stalin. The world was divided during the Cold War between two rival groups, NATO, seen here in blue, and the Warsaw Pact, seen here in red. Warsaw is a city in Poland, and please circle Poland on your map. Here it is, Poland, Poland, Poland. Please circle it. And the Warsaw Pact was a treaty signed by the Soviet Union and its satellite nations in Poland. And its goal was to defend all members from attack. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was signed in 1949 by the US and countries in Western Europe. Its purpose was to agree to protect all members from the Soviet Union and its threat. And we are done talking about the start of the Cold War. You have one research question to write down, reread your notes, think about one question you'd like to ask about any of the information. This is worth 2 points. And when you're done with that, you are done with 9-1. Until next time, this is Mr. Deegan, signing off.